Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, a podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. And now your host, David Ginsburg.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Tales from the Fandom. I'm so excited for you guys to get to listen to the episode with Curtis of Dungeons & Dragons & Daughters podcast. We recorded this episode right before the Thanksgiving Day holiday here in the United States. So it's been a while. Some announcements have come out as far as new information on a new Dune series, which you may have seen Curtis and I tweeting back and forth about on our respective Twitters. And Curtis is a big lover of Dune, so that takes up a large section of this podcast. We talk about Dune, we talk about the Star Trek reboot movies under JJ Abrams, we talk about Deep Space Nine, and then we also talk, obviously, about Dungeons & Dragons and the podcast Dungeons & Dragons & Daughters. So definitely enjoy this episode. It was a blast to get to talk with Curtis. I hope to have him back again at some point in the future, or maybe even his daughters, if time allows and scheduling, because they are a blast to listen to on his podcast. And as always, you can find us on our Facebook page, our Twitter, our website, and if you feel like supporting the show, you can go to patreon.com/talesfromthefandom, and as little as $1 a month, you can get some content early, some episodes ahead of time, and even more goodies from there. So definitely think about it and enjoy this episode as we get into the mid-month of January. Holy cow, I cannot believe it's that time again. And again, we do podcast promos, and obviously Curtis's Dungeons & Dragons & Daughters takes that spot for this time. So enjoy the episode, and thanks so much for listening.
Experience Dungeons & Dragons like you've never experienced before.
So girls, tell us about Dave.
So,
Tell me how great I am.
Dave's a little drunk and all.
Feel the tension.
We'd like some chips.
They don't have any chips.
Feel the excitement.
29 more javelins.
You gonna throw another javelin?
Well, 29 more.
Epic storytelling.
This island, as all the locals know, is the island of Atlantis, and you are not welcome here.
And with no swearing or profanity of any kind.
Ah, jeez.
This is
Dungeons & Dragons & Daughters.
Find out more at dungeonsdragonsdaughters.podbean.com, your favorite podcast service or preferred social site.
we're also on YouTube.
Welcome to another episode of Tales from the Fandom. Today I'm joined by one of my favorite actual play podcast DMs, and I have pitched the show so many times as far as trying to get people interested in it and listening to it, and I love the show. It's one where I try to listen to it immediately when it comes out, and if I don't listen to it, I get really disappointed, but I am glad to have Curtis of Dungeons & Dragons & Daughters on Tales from the Fandom. How are you doing today, Curtis?
I'm great, David. How are you?
I'm doing fairly well. I'm so happy to get to talk to you. I don't even remember where I found your podcast. I think it might have been on a Facebook group. Somebody had suggested it, but I dig Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here and talking to you about it. I'm excited to talk about it. It's something that's relatively new for me and my daughters, and I am still flabbergasted that there's people that want to listen to us play Dungeons and Dragons. In general, I think it's weird, but it's a good weird. It's a great weird. I find it weird that I find so many other people like myself that love Dungeons and Dragons so much and want to listen to other people play it as well.
I think one of the things that's happened recently with actual play podcasts is that with the success of like the Adventure Zone or Critical Role, all these podcasts and actual plays that have been out there for years, people are finally saying, well, if they can do it, I can do it. And what I found is it's so easy to get in on actual plays from the ground floor. Like your podcast, I think, was 3 or 4 episodes in by the time that I had started listening. And I was like, oh, I can handle this easily. That's only like 4 hours of listening. which is wonderful finding those new actual play podcasts to jump in on.
I agree. The Adventure Zone was that was the first one that I was introduced, and that was before I even knew that Dungeons and Dragons role play podcasts were a thing. And so started devouring that show pretty quickly. But that one, I was a little hesitant because it was even at the time that I started listening to it, there was a big backlog of episodes to get through. And I have to say, even now, as I'm discovering, because I'm always looking for new D&D play podcasts because I've got a long commute and I'm always looking for some new stuff to listen to. But sometimes it's daunting if there's a large backlog of episodes that you have to get through. So any of the newer ones that have just a couple of episodes under their belt do seem a little bit more attractive at the beginning. But there's it's a lot of times too. Actually, if you could just listen to a couple of episodes and you get a feeling for what the show is like and the quality and the goofiness level or the seriousness of it, that usually gives you a pretty good indicator if you'll like the show. And so then going all the way back to the beginning is not that big of a deal, but still, yeah, there's still a little bit of anxiety in having to get through that whole backlog.
Yeah, it's just like looking on Netflix and you see those shows where people are like, "Oh, you need to watch it," and I'm like, "Well, it's 12 seasons and there's 24 episodes each season at 40 minutes each. That's a commitment of a lot of time, and I only have about maybe an hour to an hour and a half of commuting time every day. So I pick if I'm listening to a D&D actual play, that's generally one episode. And then I can squeeze in a different podcast or a half of another episode. I looked at the Adventure Zone. I was like, nope, I just can't do it. It's just so much.
Right. It's a commitment. Yeah, that's for sure. I've got a backlog of television shows from folks that they say, you have to watch this. And sometimes even if there's only a couple of seasons that are out there, it's still a commitment to get through that, because especially if it's a great show, a lot of times I like to watch these shows with my wife. And so finding the time where both of us can sit down and watch the show together, getting through an entire season of a new show can take months for our schedules to line up, or once the kids are to bed, or if we even have the energy to stay up at night and watch the shows together. So it's you kind of have to be a little picky, or sometimes you just have to jump at the show as the opportunity arises.
Yeah, that's definitely the case with us too. I know that we were talking before the show, before we start recording about it, and it's the same thing. Just trying to organize schedules and line up things, or I might be tired, or I might be working, or my wife might be tired, or she's got a different project to do. So sometimes we can't watch those shows, and both of us have kids at the same age, give or take. And one of the things that I got backlogged on was all these cool video games that people kept talking about. And I'm like, oh yeah, I haven't played that. I haven't played this one. No, I never got the chance to play that. And now it's like too late. I'm past even interested in playing them at this point.
Talk about a commitment there. I mean, some of these new video games are coming out, especially because I'm a big RPG fan of video games as well. So anytime that I sit down, and I'm a completionist. I grew up in the 80s. I had the classic Nintendo Entertainment System at home. I got trained in video games to look at everything, to explore every nook and cranny and complete every possible thing I could in a video game, because if I didn't, you didn't beat the game. So now when I play these huge, expansive RPGs like Skyrim, or the Elder Scrolls games, or Mass Effect, or even Dark Souls. Although Dark Souls, that is one game that I never tried to attempt to do a full completion from end to end, because that game will drive you into insanity. But the commitment that you have to do for these games now to play them from beginning to end it's unbelievable. It's like taking a second full-time job to get through these things.
Oh yeah, I mean, I got a PlayStation 4 for Christmas, and one of my favorite games is Final Fantasy X. And in college, I devoted, hundreds of hours into it, and talked to everybody, and played it through multiple times, as you're supposed to do, because you got to get different things and add to the alphabet and whatever. And I tried to play it and had one of my kids with me while I was playing it. I was like, I just can't, because I don't know when the next save sphere is going to be, and I just can't invest that time now. It's crazy.
It's like entertainment and video games and television shouldn't be this stressful. I shouldn't have to work this hard to work it into my schedule, damn it.
Oh man. Yeah, it is it's definitely a different experience sometimes, but then I think at times, like especially with my wife and I, we narrow down like the shows that we want to watch. Like we have our must-watch shows, and we'll watch those, and then anything else is kind of like extra for us.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's you gotta you have to prioritize it with everything else in life, and it's just it's sometimes you just have to let it go. Sometimes it's and not feel bad about not getting to that one show or that one video game. Plus, it's not like the water cooler conversations of television that they used to be able to have. It's not everyone is watching all the same shows like they used to. So I think that's one of the reasons why I enjoy your podcast so much, and one of the reasons why I think that you enjoy doing it and having so many different people on is because you get to go out and find those individuals that do like these weird, random, strange things, and finding those commonalities, because it is so diverse of the interests and entertainment that's available out there for everyone these days.
Yeah, it's incredible just getting to talk to so many different people who, if I hadn't done this at all, I would have no idea and would never have talked to people. And I would have just, I guess, read my books and maybe squeezed in a video game here or there.
The video games is still the hardest thing that I have to squeeze in these days. It's again, it's just it's time consuming to sit down and play through it, and just the number of hours to get through it. So it seems like it's mostly television shows and movies that I do. But actually, funny enough, it's since I started doing Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters, I've been listening to a lot more podcasts than I ever did before. And like I said, with my commute, that seems to be my primary mode of entertainment nowadays. So it's like I think on a general day, I'm listening to more podcasts than to any other medium at the moment, which is great, but weird, because it's just in like the last year or so that's occurred because of playing Dungeons and Dragons with my kids.
Right, and that's just incredible. And one of the things I think is a quote somebody had put out there in one of the Facebook communities was like, "There's a podcast for everything." Like I saw a post today about a podcast all about clarinets.
Oh, and I'm sure they've got a hardcore following too.
Yeah, I think they posted that they broke, and we're recording this in November, so I think it's called Clarineats. Shout out to Clarineats podcast. But I think they crossed like 10,000 downloads or some really big number that they that they had passed. So that's like, that's such a niche thing. But I mean, if you've got people that are clarinet people, I guess that's a podcast for you to add into your listening routine or something.
Well, I mean, before I was introduced to the Adventure Zone and found out that D&D live play podcasts were a thing, I honestly didn't listen to podcasts on a regular basis. Every now and again, I would hear someone would recommend something or about a particular topic. So once I started getting into Dungeons and Dragons and looking into putting a podcast on about it, and I started looking into all of the different other podcasts that are out there, it's like that's when it dawned on me. It's like I knew podcasting was big. I didn't realize that it was as big as it was, and it was as diverse as it was.
Yeah, same here. I mean, I listened to podcasts back in 2004, 2005, just like I found a cool video game podcast, so I'd listen to that. But then I dropped off, and then doing this podcast, I started discovering other people's podcasts, and there's podcasts that I found that's like, I didn't know that I needed this in my life, but I'm so glad that I found it.
Right. So it's at the point that I'm at in my life, though, if I discover something, I feel like I'm old enough and lame enough now that if I'm just finding out about it, it's already hugely popular.
That's yeah. I'm right there alongside you. Although the one thing I don't get is true crime as far as podcasts go. It's the one thing that I've tried, but I can't listen to it for whatever reason.
I've never even given it a try, so I don't know if that's up my lane or not.
Now, we are here to not just talk about like our childhoods and video games and the lack of ability of time and ability or to squeeze them in. We're here to talk fandom, and as people that listen to the show know, I send out a questionnaire to find out what people are into. And there's one topic, and I think you're going to be the first person to discuss this on the podcast, and it is Dune, which is, I know it's a popular movie or TV miniseries, and I know there's books, but other than that, I don't know much about it. Besides that, I think there's spice. Maybe, I don't know. Help me out.
I'm a little shocked that I'm the first one to talk about it, but I'm super pumped that I'm the first one that gets to introduce you to it. Well, not introduce you to it, but the first one to talk about it and give, I guess, a little bit of a history about it. Yeah, it's books, primarily books. That's how it got started out by Frank Herbert decades ago. I believe the first one he started writing in the late 1960s and published in the 1970s. And then he wrote the original series from the 70s to the 80s. And then there was David Lynch did a movie. And so just a kind of a quick history recap of all of it. David Lynch did a movie. They even did a couple of video games on the NES. They did some other strategy, some RPG games that were in there too. I even remember one that I had for Sega CD. For those that actually remember what that is, they did and the Sci-Fi Channel, they did a extended version of David Lynch's Dune movie that they released, but I think that they mainly did that as promotion for the new sci-fi miniseries that they were doing, which they did Dune and they did Children of Dune. So those two miniseries was spanning the first 3 books in the series. And
right,
then
I remember those. I remember those coming out, but I never watched them. And I know that some of my friends that are big people that are big, fans of Dune, they said that they had mixed feelings after watching it. So
really, okay,
didn't watch it.
So I have pleasant memories of watching those. I think maybe because, and there's probably going to be folks with strong opinions about this, but just because the Lynch version, the Lynch movie of Dune, I thought it was kind of terrible. And I thought it was a poor representation of the book and the vision that Frank Herbert had written. But to each their own, and each artist has their own vision for what the world would be like. So when Sci-Fi released the miniseries, they were a much closer interpretation to the books than what David Lynch's Dune was. Granted, Lynch had a much bigger budget for doing his movie compared to the miniseries that the Sci-Fi Channel did. That's probably the biggest complaint I would have about those, is that they do look a little cheap. It's like the special effects and the sets and the costumes. It does look like a television show in a lot of ways. But as far as the characters and the story is concerned, they kept it's the closest visual representation to the original books that I've seen. And if there are others out there that can recommend something else that I haven't seen yet, that's they consider a better interpretation, I am all ears and eyes, and could not wait to get my hands on something like that. So after the miniseries, so that's kind of where I start getting some really strong negative feelings about Dune, because that is when Brian Herbert, Frank Herbert's son, discovered. So Frank Herbert died before he finished his series of Dune, and decades went by, and fan base built up. I mean, it's probably the most popular science fiction series of all time. But the drama and the kind of the soap opera-esque of it is that his son, Brian Herbert, found old notes and outlines for the final Dune book in a safety deposit box of his father's. So he took those notes, and it got reported out that he was finally going to finish the Dune series. We were finally going to get an ending to the books that we've been waiting decades for. And he went on to write a bunch of prequels and sequels that took place in the universe that I'm told that there are people that are fans of them. Because, well, they keep writing them and they keep selling well. So why else would they keep doing that unless there's a lot of people that like them? But I am firmly in the camp of hating all of the new Dune books that are being written by him.
Oh my goodness, that's like whenever I see stuff that's coming out like from J.R.R. Tolkien or someone along those lines, where it's like, where do you keep finding this stuff? And are you telling me it's really their stuff, or like how much of it is true, or are you just making it up and you want the money?
Right. It's yeah. I mean, and if they're making money off of it, if that means people are buying it, so that means people are enjoying it. So I find that a difficult thing to fault them for, because if they weren't making money off of it, that means people wouldn't be buying it, and then therefore they would stop doing it. But as long as you keep throwing money at them, they're going to keep doing it. So, but with these books, though, is that one of the reasons why that that Brian Herbert, and I forget, he had a partner author that he was doing these books with. The reason why they went back and did a bunch of prequels and in between sequel books is because apparently they wanted to have some practice in writing in the Dune universe before they finished the original series of books, which makes sense that they wanted to test out the Dune waters a little bit. But and I could go on and why I don't like them, but it's the inconsistencies that they wrote into these books are infuriating, and the way that they treat some of the elements in Dune, it's just like it's hard to make the argument that they're just interpreting it differently or having a different vision than what Frank Herbert had. It's like there's just some things that they're flat out getting wrong, and that's the piece that is just like I can't forgive. I can't understand that. It's like it's the continuity change is changing the way the characters are changing, the way that just the physics in the Dune universe work. That's the sort of thing that I just can't get past. It'd be like someone coming in and trying to make Star Trek and then saying that the teleporter works in a completely different way. And and it's kind of like the detail that it's like, well, what are you getting so upset about? But it's just kind of like, well, that's what Star Trek is,
Oh my goodness, that sounds. I don't even know what to say about that.
So the reason why I love Dune so much, so even the new books, I think that they're probably still worth your time in reading, because they take place in the universe, and they've written so many of these new books now that they've actually written more books in the Dune universe than what Frank Herbert has. So technically, they're the authority on the Dune universe just simply by volume. But if you're going to go back and read them, I would definitely suggest starting with the original books first. They can be, I think, a little challenging at first because they are older books. The writing style is a little bit formal compared to the newer books. But I think that you run into that probably in a more extreme example if you're trying to read the Lord of the Rings books. It's like those, if you're not used to reading or haven't picked them up in a while, they take a little bit of time before you get used to the rhythm and the language that Tolkien uses in them.
Definitely. What was your draw to the Dune series? Like, why is that like your series that you are into that much, and that's your series?
So the Dune series, I was introduced to the Dune series fairly early on. I think it was 15 or 16 in high school when a friend had loaned the books to me. He's like, you have to read these if you're a sci-fi fan. So just based off of the recommendation of my friend at the time, is like that piqued my interest, and I sat down and reading it. And the science fiction that's in these books was so different at the time compared to anything else that I'd ever read. So the first one being, these are books that the first book takes place 10,000 years into the future. Earth isn't even mentioned. It's not even in the equation. It's like humanity. It's so far into the future. Earth is a distant memory. And the other big thing about it is that computers are outlawed in the Dune universe. And the reason for that is because in that 10,000 year history of Dune, leading up to the very first book, they had this thing called the Butlerian Jihad. And that's where humanity almost got wiped out by the computers and the thinking machines that they had created. They automated everything in their lives through computers and machines, and it nearly destroyed humanity. And so to prevent that from ever happening again, it took on this religious fervor that thinking machines had to be wiped out of the universe, and we can never make another machine again in the form of a human mind. And after they destroyed all the thinking machines, then that propelled thousands of years of history for humanity, of training and honing their bodies and using chemicals to expand their minds and enhance their reflexes and their speed and their muscles. And they also discovered that was the only way that they could travel through space safely as well. And that's where spice comes in. That's where spice, melange, it's the most valuable substance in the universe. And this substance is the only way that you can travel through space, because the primary mode of space travel in Dune is folding space. So they can literally jump from one end of the universe to another in the blink of an eye. But the problem with that, though, is that it takes they have to plot out the course to fold space so that they don't end up in the middle of a star on the way there or once they get to the other side. Mm-hmm. And they found that if you take enough of this spice, your mind gets expanded enough. So granted, keep in mind, this is the 60s and 70s, right? So if you take enough of the substance, it expands your mind that you can start to do this kind of prescient higher level mathematics where you could plot the course from one end of the universe to the other. And so then you had what they call these guild navigators, that they essentially lived on spice all the time. They ate it, they breathed it, they could never leave their tank of spice. But that allowed them to see through space and time so that we could travel through space safely. So, and the spice only came from one planet. And that was from Dune or Arrakis. So it just, I feel like I'm rambling on.
Oh, it's okay.
The long story short, it was a sci-fi universe that had some really far out there sci-fi concepts that I hadn't encountered before because I was 16 at the time. But it also started including religious elements into it, in how humanity had to have a religious reaction or repulsion to thinking machines that projected us off into the stars. And it brought in the idea of trying to perfect the human body, the human mind, trying to live up to humans' top physical and mental potential. And then it also brought in just the economics and the politics of that world, because whoever controlled the spice controlled the entire universe. They controlled everyone, because without the spice, no one could travel through space safely. They also discovered that the spice made people live for hundreds of years longer than they normally would. It was just it was like this perfect drug that just enhanced everything about people and kept them healthier for longer. And it was also extremely addictive as well. As soon as you started taking it, your eyes would start to turn blue, showing the spice saturation in your body. And as soon as that happened, you would die if you stopped taking the spice. So there's all of these ties and threads throughout this expansive, huge sci-fi universe that all revolved around this 10,000 year history and this one particular product that was so critical to everything that it was just absolutely fascinating. And for a 16-year-old to sit down and read this series was it just blew my mind.
The only thing I can equate that to is like when I got Lord of the Rings at 12-ish or 13, and just, same as, I guess, not sci-fi, but fantasy on that side of the coin, where it's just, such in-depth and in like just the huge amount of history and background and characters. And it sounds like if I had not been introduced to Lord of the Rings, I probably would have been introduced to Dune and gone down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, I would say that they're probably pretty comparable, especially to the breadth and depth that those two universes go into. I think that probably the one thing that Tolkien has over Herbert is just the amount of work that he put into the different languages. Because from what I understand is, like, didn't Tolkien actually create the entire Elven language order to...
I believe he was a linguist first, so he created the language without even having, I believe it was he had it without even having the books written at that point.
Right.
Or he
yeah.
had the ideas for them, but he made the languages first.
Right. So he created an entirely new language just as prep work before he writes his magnum opus. So Frank Herbert gets close to that in Dune, because there's a lot of terminology that they use for the spice, for the different equipment, for the ships, for the different factions and groups and houses in Dune. And that's another thing that's really interesting as far as like the politics are concerned, is that even though this is a universe that takes place 10,000 years in the future, they've fallen back to almost kind of a medieval fiefdom sort of society on a planetary scale. So the emperor of the Landsraad, that's just the name that they have for the entire empire, all the planets that are in it. He rules over everything, but he gives out fiefdoms or fiefdoms to planets, to the different dukes and earls that are in his kingdom, and then they rule over those planets and they take care of their people, and they get to do what they will as long as they bend their will to the emperor. So I think that was probably another aspect, thinking about it in retrospect, that probably attracted me to it, was that it seemed to incorporate some of these old medieval, almost fantasy type elements into this super hardcore sci-fi book at the same time.
If people were interested in getting into Dune now, but they're maybe they don't think it's for them, what would your pitch be for, hey, you should check out Dune? Like, would you equate it to, like, well, if you liked insert movie or TV show or other publication here, if you like that, then you would like Dune, or you should give Dune a try because it's close enough to something?
Oh boy. And I'm kind of a Dune purist, so I like to steer people to the original Dune book and try that out. And if they like it, then keep going with it. But if that's a little daunting for people, I might start out asking some questions of like, what are some of the other sci-fi books that they like? Like if they've read anything from Heinlein, I could say, like, if they've read maybe Stormship Troopers or A Stranger in a Strange Land, some of those other sort of classic sci-fi novels from the same era, they would probably enjoy Dune as well. But given some of the recent things, like if they liked Blade Runner, of a really interesting and unique sci-fi universe that may not be for everyone, but is compelling. It's unique, and that is a movie that is the new one is terribly unfortunate that has not been doing well in the box office, because I thought that movie was fantastic.
I've not seen it yet. I remember watching the original Blade Runner. Well, I let me take that back. I remember watching the correct Blade Runner on videotape or DVD at one point after a friend recommended it to me, but I've not seen the new one yet. But I've heard good things about it.
What do you mean by the correct Blade Runner? Is that referring to a particular cut of the movie?
Yeah, I think it's like the director's final cut or something along those lines. I can never remember the correct terminology for it.
Okay, yeah, it's the final cut. I think was the last one that they did in the early 2000s.
I think that might be it.
Right, that's the one that that spawned or at least confirmed a lot of theories about Deckard, Harrison Ford's character, actually being a replicant rather than a human. And so this is a little bit of a spoiler alert, but it gets given away in like the first 5 minutes of the new one. But Ryan Gosling's character is a replicant in the new one, and he hunts other replicants. So I think just for that fact with the new movie, that has a lot of people throwing their hands up and saying, we were right, he was a replicant all along. But it's just, I don't know. It's like people like to read into things, but it's a movie that I can't recommend highly enough if you like the first one. Just go in knowing that it's like the first one in that it raises as many, if not more, questions that it answers.
Interesting. I'm going to have to, I haven't watched Blade Runner in years, probably since high school or early college. I'll have to go back and watch that again before I watch the new one.
So, and I realized I completely went off on a tangent there. So back to the original question. So Blade Runner is probably the most recent example that I could point someone to that if they enjoyed that and they enjoyed the new movie, they might want to try Dune. And again, I recommend them going back to the original Dune because I'm a purist, but if they might want the newer ones might be an easier read for them, but just keep in mind, I think they're total crap.
And it's okay to go off on tangents. It's quite all right.
I started listening to a Dune podcast recently. Because as we were talking before, there's a podcast for everything now, and this was a group of folks that sat down and started reading all of the Dune books and giving a recap and a review of them and what their thoughts are. And I thought this was great until I found out that they were doing them in chronological order. They weren't doing them in the order that the books were actually written in. So they were actually starting with the Son's prequel books first, and then we're going to have to go through 9 books before they even got to the original books. And I just remember thinking as I'm listening to this, this is the worst way to experience Dune, because you're slugging through all of this crap and inconsistency and poor writing, terrible writing before you get to Frank Herbert's genius, perfect novel. Well, I shouldn't say perfect, but they're fantastic. And when they finally get to the original books, they're talking to each other. It's like, I don't understand why these characters are acting this way. This seems a little out of context. It's like, I don't remember they ever doing stuff like this before. And I'm screaming at them in my car listening to this. It's because the prequel books are terrible. It's because they didn't write them right.
Oh my goodness. I cannot imagine that. It's so hard to think that somebody could take, to go back and do of course there's Star Wars, so we can, that's another rabbit hole on prequels and writing stuff afterwards or before the fact and everything else. But yeah, that's insane.
I get it. This is Frank Herbert's son that's writing these books, right? So who am I to judge, right? Who am I to critique him doing them wrong? But I'm a fan, right? And I'm entitled to my opinion, damn it.
That's right. You tell like it is.
I fully admit, it's just, there's people out there that probably love them. Otherwise, they would have stopped writing them a long time ago. But firmly in the camp that they didn't need to be there. I do have to say, though, I am glad that they did finally give me an ending, because after they wrote their 9 prequels, I think, they finally did get around to writing the last couple of books. And that's another thing, too. Instead of one final book to the Dune series, they stretched it out to 2 additional books. And that's where I'm starting to think, is this a cash grab now? But I digress. So I finally got an ending to the series, but even then, the ending that they wrote pulled in characters and concepts that they had from the prequels that they wrote. And that really rubbed me the wrong way, because it didn't seem like that they needed to pull all that stuff in. And I felt like that maybe the only reason that they did that is because maybe the notes and the outline that they had from Frank Herbert wasn't as much as we thought they were. That's the only thing that I can think of is like the outline. Maybe it literally was just a bullet outline and really didn't have a whole lot of details that were in there. And they felt that they had to go back and flesh out prequels and more of a history that they wrote in order to put more meat on the bones of the final chapter of Dune. So if that's the case, then I can be a little more forgiving and be happy that I got the outline for the ending of Dune. I just choose to ignore a lot of the details that they made up and filled in on it.
That sounds so familiar for so many different fandoms of this does not exist. I don't know what you're talking about. Now, another fandom getting away from Dune that you and I are both into is Star Trek.
Yes.
How did you get into Star Trek?
Well, I got a question for you. What are your feelings about the new Star Trek movies?
The JJ Abrams stuff?
Yeah, the Abrams verse, or what was it called? The alternate timeline version?
Yeah, I think it's called the Abrams verse. I was good with one, Star Trek 2009 or whatever it was, just Star Trek. Hated Star Trek Into Darkness. I thought it was terrible. I don't like how they had Khan, or the reimagination of Khan or whatnot. I liked Star Trek Beyond, the third one. I liked some of the characters and introducing a bunch of more action and just intriguing, ideas and characters. And I'm wondering if there's going to be more. I don't know, but I'd like there to be more. I like them. What about you? I mean, do you like them, or is it something where it's like, it's not my kind of Star Trek? Because I know a big complaint was JJ Abrams did Star Trek because he wanted to do Star Wars, and it was more Star Wars in a Star Trek universe.
Right. I share similar opinions about the 3 movies. I'm overall, of those 3, I'm okay that they exist. I'm just stoked that we are getting more Star Trek movies. The third one, Star Trek Beyond, of the 3, that was probably my favorite. That one felt the most like a Star Trek movie to me. The first one was okay. The second one I thought was okay until I started analyzing it more and realized some very critical things in the Star Trek universe that JJ Abrams screwed with that made it not Star Trek. I actually liked who's the guy that played Khan? He's got the best name in Hollywood right now.
Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yeah, Benedict Cumberbatch. I actually liked his performance as Khan. I didn't like how the character was introduced and how they treated him. But they have it at the end where they use Khan's blood as the Deus Ex Machina to fix all the problems. And when you think about it, they just found the cure for death at the end of that movie. Anyone that gets injected with this blood gets brought back to life. Bones did it on a dead Kirk. He did it on a dead Tribble. They just found the cure for everything with that one little lazy writing at the end of that movie. And just like, Okay, this is stupid. It's like just because I'm a fan of Star Trek, so I'm going to overanalyze it. I'm going to take it to the nth degree. That if you apply that science in that science fiction universe, no one's ever going to get sick anymore. No, there's never going to be any diseases. You're going to eliminate all of those really interesting plots that would happen in science fiction. And the second thing that really annoys me about Into Darkness was what they did with the transporters. Although that got introduced in the first one, didn't it? That's right. I forgot about that. So I'm not sure if... So in the first one, they beam from the ice planet onto the Enterprise while it's at warp.
Yes.
And this was after the Enterprise had already left the planet, so the Enterprise was already probably tens, if not hundreds of light years away. And they were able to transport from the planet onto the ship hundreds of light years away while it was moving at warp speed. So now you've actually just introduced a technology into the sci-fi universe that makes spaceships obsolete. There's no reason to have a spaceship anymore in Star Trek because you could just transport from one planet to another thousands of light years away, which happens in Star Trek Into Darkness, because Khan transports from Earth to the Klingon homeworld in the blink of an eye. And it's like, how is this Star Trek? This is star blinking now. It's like I'm trying to remember where I heard it from, but someone aptly described it that JJ Abrams turned Star Trek into a series about nursing homes and instant vacations because they cured all diseases and deaths, so they're just going to be taking care of old people all the time and transporting to whatever location that they wanted to go to spend out the rest of their years.
Oh my goodness, that's so crazy.
So anyway, so I always like to ask that question of what your thoughts are on the new ones, because while I enjoy them, just to gauge where folks are coming from, because yeah, Star Trek is another series that I'm passionate about. I've been a fan of for years. It's one of those fandoms that I was introduced fairly young, because the Next Generation is what I cut my teeth on as far as science fiction was concerned. Love that show from beginning to end. My favorite of the series is Deep Space Nine. It's just going back and rewatching some of the old episodes. You forget how campy and silly some of the episodes in Next Generation can be. But in Deep Space Nine, I'm shocked at how well that show and that series holds up even today. It's just a fantastic show, and it's deeper on so many different levels compared to the other Trek shows. For a lot of the same reasons why I brought up of why I like Dune, because it gets into the politics, it gets into the religion of that world, and it's just a smarter show compared to the others. Not that the others are dumb, it's just Deep Space Nine takes it to another level. And I know that you've said on previous episodes of how Deep Space Nine is your favorite of the Star Treks as well. It's like what is it about Deep Space Nine that makes it your favorite?
It's usually the same thing that you brought up. I mean, I really like the intricacies of, well, here's Benjamin Sisko, and he's coming from like one of the worst defeats that Starfleet has ever had with the Borg, and he's moving into this space station. It's not even a Federation space station. They're taking over a Cardassian space station. So now they got to deal with those problems. They've got to deal with the political and religious problems on Bajor, because now you have these people that are no longer like freedom fighters. They're able to run their own planet, or hopefully run their own planet. You have a wormhole that goes to who knows where, and you have all these plots that play out not only over like a few episodes, but over the span of the series. And I really enjoyed that. And you have these characters who you see them in the first season, and then you start seeing them more in the second or third season, and you just get to know them, and then they expand their roles. Like, I know that I talked with somebody about Garrick, the Cardassian tailor, who has such an incredible layered story. Or you have a character like Nog, who is a Ferengi boy who just happens to be living on the station, becoming the first Ferengi to go into Starfleet. And you have like that over the entire series. And then just the things that caught you off guard, like the Klingons attacking Deep Space Nine, or seeing such a really big ship battle in the Dominion territory with like the Federation and the Romulan fleets like working together to do what they could do with these huge starship battles, which were really amazing.
Especially for the time, because that they were still doing all models for the special effects, and to have dozens of ships on the screen at one time with all that was just, it was exhilarating to see that on syndicated television.
Yeah, and it doesn't hurt that like I had some of my favorite characters on the show too. Like because I watched Next Generation. I liked Chief O'Brien when you got to see him, or he got to be involved in more than just teleporting people. And I loved that he was one of those characters that got to move on to Deep Space Nine and become really just this incredible character. Or Jadzia Dax, who has this relationship with Cisco from a previous life, and now she's dealing with a life of her own, and then she has like her connection to stuff that's going on with the Klingons, and when Worf comes in and joins the crew, and it's just such a show that I just really like, and I loved getting to like do my rewatches of that. It's the one that I love rewatching the most.
I agree. It's Voyager I didn't care for as much. In fact, I want to say that I skipped over a number of episodes towards the last couple seasons of that show. I don't know. There was just something about that show of where I thought the premise was interesting of it. But it was almost like the premise got done to death. It just took them too long to get back to Federation space for me to stay interested in all of these characters. And it seemed like that they relied a lot on, I don't know, and this is hard to say because I love science fiction, but it just seemed like it was a little too much techno babble in Voyager. It seemed like that they relied on a lot of really archaic scientific concepts, and as long as they could just throw out enough technobabble that explains it, and so it just seemed like that there was a lot of lazy writing in their concepts and in their plot devices. I mean, I was gonna say, and then Enterprise, I'm still trying to work my way through that show, but I have to admit that one's a bit of a slog for me to get through.
Well, I know I was not a fan of Voyager when it first debuted, and I became a fan after, like, when I was able to watch it on Netflix and kind of just slowly make my way through it. I liked it, but again, there's a lot of times where it was just, I could have not cared for, like, that storyline or that episode. Granted, they had some really incredible episodes, and I loved the initial concept of having these two different crews having to work together and fend for themselves, and they're all alone and without allies and just trying to get back to a place where they may never get back to. I just think sometimes it wasn't handled the best, or they just, I don't know, they had some episodes that just made the show a little bit weaker than it could have been. But I've never finished. I've watched the first season of Enterprise, and that was it. I was done. And I did watch the ending of Enterprise based on like the fan outcry and reaction about what it was, and I was like, oh damn, like that's a way to end the series. No spoilers in case you don't know how it ends.
I don't know yet. So what you're telling me is that it's still going to remain a slog if I ever finish out the series, but maybe the ending might be worth it because of how much of a shock it is.
Well, I heard that it gets better. I'm not sure where or what season, but I heard that it does get better beyond season 1, but I don't know when or where that happens, so I can't advise you on that, but I know that the ending is a shock.
Okay.
So
okay,
I'll leave it at that.
Now you've got my interest piqued. Yeah. So I still haven't watched Discovery yet, mainly because I think the way that they set up the way to watch the show is a little ridiculous. And so I'm kind of waiting for the season to be over with, and then pay for the 1 month of the subscription, and then binge watch the whole thing.
That's what I've heard. I had a conversation with someone about that specifically because they were talking about another show that was coming back. Stargate is making a comeback on TV, and they're doing this whole thing where they've collected all the seasons of Stargate onto this one website, and you can watch all the Stargates all together, and there's like fan communities and discussion groups and stuff like that are tied into this, so that way they can kind of judge if there's interest in doing the season beyond like the I think it's like 10 episodes, 10 minutes each kind of miniseries that they're going to do. But I've not watched Discovery either. I know I have friends that are watching it. They have problems with, I think the Klingons is their biggest like retcon thing that they're going back and doing. But I'm waiting for it. I know, but the funny thing is that they've renewed it for a second season on All Access. So they've once again now said that it's not coming onto TV, which it's a real bummer that there's no Star Trek on actual, terrestrial TV.
Yes, I agree. And maybe it wouldn't be so bad if CBS had, they have this paywall. If they had more content behind that paywall, like Netflix or Hulu, but it seems like it's just Star Trek and maybe a couple of other reality television shows. In fact, I'm not even sure what they have back there. I just know there wasn't enough back there besides Star Trek to pique my interest to look into it.
Right. I know that one of my friends is paying for it only because they don't have cable, and they like some of the other CBS shows that are on there. But I was looking at, what I watch on a normal basis, and there's one show, maybe 2 shows, and that's it. And there's no need for me to pay whatever it works out to be, like $18 for one season of a show. I'm good with waiting.
Right. Yeah. Same here. And at first I did have some apprehension about that, because we finally got some more Star Trek. We finally got a new Star Trek TV show, and it's in the original timeline. And I'm like, what if I don't pay for it? What if I don't support it? What if it's really good? Are they going to stop making it?
Yep. Yeah, that was the thing. That's the thing that a lot of people were frustrated with, because I know, we're the same age, give or take a year or whatever, that I remember thinking that there's always going to be Star Trek on TV forever. Like, okay, Voyager went off the air, Enterprise came on, I guess like a year or 2 later, maybe. I cannot remember. But it's like, I always thought there'd be some kind of Star Trek, and it's shocking that it took this long to get it. And then it's disappointing that we got it behind the paywall.
Right. Because it's, not having it on syndicated television. Yeah, I agree. It always felt like that there was going to be Star Trek on television. It felt like that it was a cultural staple that we had. And I think it's a good staple, because the thing that's so attractive about Star Trek is that it's science fiction that hopes for the best of humanity. It's where humanity finally gets their act together and learns how to work together for the common good. They eradicate, most diseases. They achieve star travel. Their primary goals are exploration and learning and peace. And it was just like, it's such a euphoric ideal to be working towards, when so much stuff these days is dark and some dystopia of the future, of where we blow ourselves up or something happens and where we got to pick the pieces back up. And Star Trek assumes the best of us. And I think it's a very uplifting thing to have, and not to have that influence on television, I think culturally has an impact, and not in its absence.
I have to agree. And it's I don't know what else to say about it beyond, like, I wish that Star Trek was always around, and I don't know, like, there's something about Star Trek, like you said, it's the hope for the best. in us and giving us like that ideal to strive towards. And it's shocking because of how many things that we have now in our lives that are based on things from Star Trek.
Oh gosh, yes, yes. Oh, so many fantastic things have come out of it. Yeah. The data pads or the communicators. It's like those are common everyday devices now.
Yeah, it's crazy. Now, I will hope one day to have like a holodeck or a holosuite or something of that nature. That would probably be the tops, but I don't know if that'll happen in my lifetime.
It's yeah, I think it would be a struggle if it happened in our lifetime. But the thing is that it's conceivable that it could. I just think it would take, like someone like Tony Stark to put up the money for it.
Now, I wanted to jump into a mixture between the next topic and your podcast because they're kind of blended, and that is Dungeons and Dragons. Now, how did you get into Dungeons and Dragons? Was that something in high school? Was that pre-high school, college? Like what how did you get into it?
It was high school. It was actually my junior year of high school. So given the age that most people get in the Dungeons and Dragons, I feel like that I got into it relatively late. And it was the same friends that introduced me to Dune were the ones that introduced me to Dungeons and Dragons. So at the time, that was second edition Dungeons and Dragons that I got into,
Mm-hmm.
and just started playing reluctantly at first because I still had it a little bit in the back of my head at that time, the whole 80s campaign about Dungeons and Dragons being a cult and being this really terrible thing that warps the minds of the upcoming generation. So it's just kind of like, yeah, I'm not really sure if I'm ready to delve into that. And when I finally did, it's just like, really, this is what Dungeons and Dragons is? This is awesome. I want to do this as much as I possibly can. And so then went on a big splurge, and for the time, it's like all my income, all my disposable income seemed to be spent on Dungeons and Dragons books and compendiums and all that. And then I almost immediately started running my own campaign, simply because I couldn't get together with those guys often enough to play it, and I wanted to play more. So it was the quickest way to get a Dungeons and Dragons game going is to be the DM, because there's a severe lack of dungeon masters that are available even to this day.
Yes, that is true. And man, again, same time period. I remember going to the mall and going to like Walden Books or B. Dalton, getting those second edition, like the complete guide to elves or the complete guide to dwarves or the complete Ranger's handbook or whatever. Like those books were those like first role-playing books that I ever got my hands on.
It's such a great pastime, because it was Dungeons and Dragons that got me to go out to Schindler's, to the gaming, the comic book store. And that was really my gateway into all of that stuff. I started reading and collecting comics after that. Started getting into other more expansive board games, getting into other role-playing games. And in fact, it's like after Dungeons and Dragons, I started playing this sci-fi RPG called Alternity.
Mm-hmm.
And we started playing that because after playing Dungeons and Dragons for a couple of years, all of the group of guys that I played with, we were all fantasy and sci-fi nerds. And we were kind of done with the sword and board campaigns. It's like we wanted to go out into outer space. We wanted to shoot pew pew laser guns and meet aliens and all this, right? So Alternity was this new game that they released, I think in like 99 or 2000, somewhere around in the late 90s. And so we switched over to that game, and we literally played that game with the same group of guys for almost 20 years.
Ooh.
And it was just, and we would switch campaigns, every couple of years. So we wouldn't be playing the same characters in the same campaign that entire time, but we played the same mechanics from that same player's handbook and game master guide of Alternity for almost 20 years. And then it started getting to the point of where I felt like things were finally, after 2 decades, things are feeling a little stagnant with this. I've been hearing a lot of good things, a lot of new innovations and rules and adjustments that have been happening in games. And then, lo and behold, the 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons comes out. And then I read this article about how it made like the top 10 sellers list. I'm like, well, that's weird for a Dungeons and Dragons player's handbook to be on the top sellers list. So on a whim, I ordered it from Amazon, and it sat on my shelf for a while and paged through it every now and again, and finally sat down and read it. And that was the springboard to try it out with my daughters, Samantha and Birdie, who up until that time, I tried doing a very simplistic pencil and paper game that used dice that we pulled out of a Monopoly set. Mm-hmm. I just kind of came up with some random rules. As long as the dice roll was high, then you were succeeded. If it was low, then you didn't. And they loved the concept of it so much that I thought, okay, well, let's try Dungeons and Dragons. If they could handle some of these rules, let's see if they can handle something that's a little bit more complex. And I was going to use it as kind of a test bed to see if I could get used to playing it, understand the rules a little bit more, see how it went with the girls. Then maybe I could use that as a good test case to bring it back to my 20-year group of guys that have been playing this alternative game with, to see if they'd be willing, after 2 decades, to make the switch to 5th edition D&D. And finally, I talked them into it, but that was, after starting up the podcast and playing Dungeons and Dragons with my daughters.
That's, number one, a group that's been together for that long. That is super incredible, and probably so rare these days to get some a group together that and keep them for so long. That's I'm jealous, but
yeah, and I'm still baffled that we managed to keep us together, because 75% of the people that were in the group originally had moved all over the country, went off to college, got married, had kids, and they all ended up back here in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, which is just really, really weird that everyone just ended up being back here. So there was some large gaps that happened over that 20-year period that we couldn't get together and play. But yeah, it just happenstance that they all ended up back in the same area, and we could continue playing. So in fact, Matt Lane, he's my best friend. He's been on our podcast playing Dave a number of times. And I think that we're probably going to have him back a lot more, playing that character regularly, because it's starting to get difficult of having new people come onto the show every single episode and having to jump right in, especially if they haven't played Dungeons and Dragons before, or if they haven't been keeping up to date on what's going on with the story and the characters. So I think just for making it easier for me, for not having to do as much recapping and prep work with people that we have on the show, we might have Matt on probably as a more regular cast member going forward.
Now, for those who haven't listened to Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters yet, what is your pitch to them for hey, this is what the podcast is all about?
Oh boy. Okay, so obviously 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons live play podcast. I will use live play loosely because I do a lot of editing. So we're goofy. The girls do need breaks. Sometimes they lose attention. I try and edit all of that out to keep it down to just the story and the action that's happening. But when I edit it down and I capture those magical moments, it's Dungeons and Dragons: A Daughter is a father introducing Dungeons and Dragons to his twin 8-year-old daughters, and I'm completely biased with this, but it's magic. It is an incredible experience to see my little girls playing the warriors, tramping through the dungeon, troubleshooting and figuring out these puzzles, or being naturally just empathetic and good and being the heroes, and also attacking different situations differently than just attacking it, which is the biggest surprise for me, that their first instinct isn't to just stab it.
Right.
Which is what I've been always used to for the last 30 years of playing these kinds of games. So it's just, it's lighthearted, it's kid-friendly, but I'm trying to craft a story that is entertaining and is going to have a definite beginning, middle, and ending to it. So I don't know if we're going to do more after I finish this story with them. We'll have to see how it goes, but I have a very specific story laid out that's got a lot of history behind it. And just to give a little bit more information, there is the story that I'm telling right now is going to be a little bit of a winding path in getting into it, and there's going to be a lot that gets covered with it. But it's a story that's near and dear to my heart, because this was a story that Matt and I actually originally came up with almost 20 years ago. Because one of the guys that we had in our original gaming group died in a car accident when he was 17 at the time. And this story that we crafted was kind of our tribute to him, because we always talked about doing a Final Fantasy campaign, of doing a campaign that mixed in magic and technology and see what we could do with something like that, just use it as a general basis. And before we could ever sit down and plan out this campaign and make characters for it, his car slipped on ice and drifted headfirst into a semi-truck. And it was heartbreaking, and it's still something to this day that it gives me pause to think about with how tragic it was. And to be able to do this tribute, because Matt and I sat down, we did the campaign, and it's a great story. The ending is absolutely fantastic. And obviously and I'm trying to recreate that campaign with my girls right now. Mm-hmm. It's obviously going to be very different compared to the way that we originally played it, because it's all new players, it's all new characters. But the overall structure and the ending, I think, is going to end up being the same. And I'm just really excited, especially with Chris, who died, being able to share this story that we did in tribute to him with as many people as possible, is something that's very, very near and dear to my heart.
It's definitely going to be something to listen to, especially now that, you've given that background, and it's just, I can't imagine. I mean, that's just something that, you don't hear that often about doing something along those lines, and then just getting it into in front, and not only that, but getting to play it with your daughters is just incredible.
There is something about playing with your kids on something like this too, and I feel like that the age that they're at is kind of a sweet spot for playing these kinds of games with your parents, because I feel like the window and opportunity of playing with them is going to close very, very soon, because they're going to get into the pre-teen years and all that. Mm-hmm. And so I've only introduced the game to them, and going through this, the background and the origin of this campaign and story, I haven't loaded that onto them, because there just isn't a need for that, and I don't want to weigh down the fun that we have. And so this doesn't come up in the show. It's not going to come up in the show, but I think it's interesting to talk about how we came up with this story and this campaign to begin with, that I'm playing for a couple of 8-year-olds. So by the end of it, it's going to be a serious story, and it's something that I've had a long time to think about and craft, and I'm doing it for very, very close to the heart reasons.
Now, the one thing that you had mentioned, the mixture of the medieval kind of fantasy stuff with the technology, that was one of the things that caught me off guard when I was listening. I don't remember what episode it was, but I think it was when they're with Jed. And then all of a sudden, I know that you put in some pop culture-y type references, things that maybe the girls don't get yet, but that you're throwing it in for the people like me who are listening. I'm like, wait a minute. They're talking about some Star Trek stuff, or they're talking about something else, or I'm like, oh, wait, what do you mean? There's like guns all of a sudden. I'm like, okay, this is not the it's not like the D&D that I'm expecting, but I'm in it for the story.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, and the girls, yeah, they didn't even break stride. They're just kind of like, okay, they just accepted it because it's like they didn't know what to expect, and they're just like, okay, this is just the way Dungeons and Dragons is, and they just went along with it and didn't bat an eye at it.
Yeah, and it's such a fun show, and you were bringing up the rotating Dave, which there are definite times where I'm like, did the Dave person not get like some good notes on how Dave of last episode acted? Because there are some Daves where it's like, okay, this Dave is like Dave 1.0, or this Dave is like drunk Dave, and then there's like mace wielding Dave, or the one I was listening to today was like the Dave that's spouting made up verses from like his religion that he follows. Is like, okay,
right, yeah, he was taking the cleric role, very seriously, because it was like we came up with a background for Dave. And so for anyone that hasn't listened to the story, episode 0 is me sitting down with the girls and talking about the kinds of characters that we're going to create and the kind of show that we're going to do. And one of the characters that was going to be in our group was going to be Dave. He was going to be this constantly rotating character that we were going to bring new people in to play. And the girls insisted that Dave had to be smart, dumb, and drunk. And that gives me a little bit of a complex about the amount of alcohol that I consume, if that is one of the main attributes that comes out of their mouths when creating a fictional character that they're going to pal around with. But that was, so it does seem like every person that we bring on, they bring their own Dave to the table, and they embrace certain aspects of the character that the girls have wanted to develop. And it's been working out so far, but it is starting to get a little bit more complicated. And so I think that I think we might bring Matt back to be Dave on a regular basis, as I mentioned before, just to have a little bit more continuity. And plus, it is starting to get to a level of complexity with the game and the rules that I think having another experienced player at the table will help to keep things focused and on track with the girls, because they're 8. I think we're starting to get to the point of where the level of complexity is starting to get a little beyond them without having to put in a lot of hard work. And I'm trying to keep it as fun and light as I can for them at this point.
I was going to bring up, I just finished Teeth and Sand Part 3, and I was just curious because I'm not sure which of your girls is the one that's bringing it up, but they have one of them has a very, I wouldn't say obsession, but they always want whiskey.
Yeah, that's Samantha. That's Mimi. Her character is the druid. Yes, she always wants whiskey. She's constantly bringing it up, and I have no idea why that she's like that. There maybe last year there was like a couple of months of where I was starting to get really interested in scotches. So I was on a scotch kick for a while. And so I was buying a couple of different bottles of scotches, trying to figure out what kind of a scotch man I was.
Right.
And so I think maybe that just came at a time of where, wow, Dad's buying a lot of whiskey. And so ever since then, it's like she's just obsessed with whiskey. That's like her equivalent of proving to people that she's an adult. This is what adults do. Mm-hmm. They drink whiskey. So that's what I'm going to do since I'm playing this adult character.
Now,
again,
go ahead.
Giving me a little bit of giving me a little bit of complex about my alcohol consumption if she's that obsessed with it.
I did want to ask, like when you guys did character creation for the game, did the girls pick what they wanted to be? And if so, like how, like, did they pick based off of, reading the description or just, pictures or what they like? a brief basic, like, well, druids do like nature spells or...
I pulled out the player's handbook and showed them the pictures of each of them, of each of the classes, and I gave them kind of a rough description of each. And the thing that I was so put off by is that they both picked something very, very quickly. They're like, nope, that's what I want. I don't need to hear anything else. I'm like, well, there's also a rogue that can do, no, Dad, I got it. This is the one I want to be. I'm like, really? You don't want to hear about him? Nope, I'm good. This is the one I want. And the one that surprised me the most was that Birdie, playing Galaxy, she chose a wizard, and which I thought was great. But in the back of my mind is like, damn it, this is going to be the most complicated character class. I'm going to have to do all the spell management for this character.
Yeah, even I, as you know, I've been playing D&D from like 96, give or take. I don't play magic. I'll play clerics or druids, but I don't play magic users. I don't play like straight up wizards or sorcerers. I don't want to handle spells, and I've been doing it for that long where that's not for me.
It is another layer of management that you have to do in the game. So I probably do more of that than I should with them, but it's just for the sake of simplicity and for the game and editing purposes, that if I can just sort of lead them by the nose through what spells to pick, or how they work, and kind of give them the Cliff Notes version. I've gotten to the point of making little note cards for them, of where I just write out in quick little bullets of like, here's the main details of this spell that you need to know about.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the back side, started drawing like the examples of how these spells work, of like, you know, like taking examples almost directly from the player's handbook, of like very simply illustrating, here's what a cone looks like, and it can be shot 15 feet away from you, or here's a cube or a rectangle on the floor. And I'm hoping that will help get them more proficient and independent on the use of their spells. But so far, I've been having to do most of the management for them.
Now, behind the scenes, I know you said that sometimes it takes a while for, you know, maybe like refocusing the girls, or they lose interest and get back. What's your average? The episodes generally work out to be an hour. What's your average game time? Like, I almost wonder, are you sitting down at the table for like 3 to 4 hours, or do you break it up?
3 to 4 hours. 3 to 4 hours. We usually have a couple of potty breaks in the middle of it, and most of it ends up because it ends up as an hour. So I'm cutting about 2/3 of what we record, just simply because it's like they're 8, and there's something about putting a microphone or a camera on an 8-year-old that brings out their worst impulses. So it's and that was another reason why the podcast had gotten started, is because we record the session on video and we post it onto YouTube. But the girls initially really wanted to do a YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, well, I don't know how comfortable I feel about you guys doing a YouTube channel. What is it that you want to do on the YouTube channel? And they were, again, all over the place and saying that they wanted to play games and do reviews and play video games and watch TV and all this. I'm like, okay, let's see if we can get this a little bit more focused, especially if I'm the one that's going to end up having to do all the work.
Right.
I would like to do something that I really enjoy. And that was another reason why we settled on doing Dungeons and Dragons, because we were already playing that. I'm like, what if we played Dungeons and Dragons on YouTube and I could put it on a podcast too? And they're like, okay, Dad, that sounds good. And so they get the camera on them, and so they like sometimes like act out and talk to the camera or do something specific to YouTube. And there's stuff that's like that I just cut out and throw away because it's unusable as far as a podcast is concerned. Because that's what I consider the primary avenue for Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters. The YouTube, that's ancillary. That's just add-on stuff. The podcast is where my heart lies.
Yeah, it's definitely something where I had thought about it. I'd listened to your podcast. I was like, oh, I wonder if I could get my kids into that. And then I think about the time that I spend editing this podcast and the time that I spend on some other projects. I'm like, I don't think I could get them to focus and do that. Like I tried to have them come on to just talk to me about what they're into now, and they didn't want to do that. Like they're like, no, I don't want to talk in the microphone.
Right, right. Oh, yeah, just the microphone etiquette as well of just talking into the microphone. There was some initial feedback that I got from a couple of folks that they just thought it hilarious of how much I had to remind them to talk into the microphone. They've gotten better. They've definitely gotten better at it, but even still on the latest episodes, it's like, please move closer to the microphone.
Right. Or just the random, randomness that comes out, and it's like, yeah, this is, I see my kids in them right now, like just the constant, saying the same thing over and over again, or, going off on like some weird tangent on nothing that's even happening in the story.
Right, right. Yeah, or bringing up a joke that happened at school that only the two of them understand or know anything about, and then they'll go off for 10 minutes on that and trying to pull some sort of gag in the adventure related to that no one has any idea what they're talking about. So it's one of the reasons why I keep ending up breaking like the cardinal rule of releasing the episodes on a very strict schedule, is because the editing takes me so long to get through all of it, to cut all the fat off of it. And then plus they're in school, I've got a job, we've got lives, and we've got dance recitals and play practices and basketball and all this other stuff too. It's just it's hard to keep on a schedule like that. So, but I do try and release a new episode every 2 weeks, but most of the time I'm not successful.
Right. Yeah, I can't even imagine that. I mean, I know our schedules, and I work around like our schedules for this podcast. It's just, I can't imagine trying to just focus everybody for that amount of time, plus coordinate with like outside Dave to come in and just, yeah, that's more power to you for doing it.
Thank you. It's probably a good scenario to start with as far as podcasting is concerned. Because if I was doing a recording with just a bunch of adults sitting around a table, I could probably finish the editing in 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. I'm exaggerating, but it feels like it that sometimes.
Definitely. Now, for those people who are listening and they want to check out Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters, where can they find you?
So the dungeonsdragonsdaughters.podbean.com, that's the main website that we have links off to. I know I probably should have our own domain name that's linked out to, and I've been planning on doing that, but I haven't gotten around to it yet. But we're pretty easy to find. Just searching on Google for Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters, we come up pretty quickly on that. But we're on Facebook at facebook.com/daughterdungeon. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. Twitter's probably the one social medium that I'm on the most, and that's at Daughter Dungeon too. Mainly because of all the different social platforms that are out there, I was surprised at how active and welcoming and warm the podcasting community was on Twitter, especially for Dungeons and Dragons live play podcast. And before this, I was not active on Twitter at all. In fact, I was told by many people to actively avoid it, saying of how toxic of an environment that it could be. But after learning it, and well, I'm still learning it, and after using it, I was pleasantly surprised that there's so many D&D 5th edition podcasts that are out there, and how much everyone was willing to help out and give each other advice and support everyone else. It's just such a fantastic community to be around. In fact, I think it was you that pointed me in the direction of the Underdog Pod community on Facebook, and that's just been a joy to read and contribute into.
And I think I was also the one that said I need a promo so I can post it on my episodes because I was talking about it in my, like, I started doing pre-roll before the episodes start, and it's like, okay, I'll do pre-roll and do a promo because it'll be easier for the people to tell them, listeners about their podcast rather than me say how much I love it. But I was like, I need one for this. Like, I need a Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters promo so I can just stick it in there.
Right, and that was just something that after I saw that, it's like, oh, I need a promo. How do you make a promo? What do you put in a promo? And do a quick Google search. What the heck goes into a promo? And I slapped it together in the next 24 hours to shot that off to you. But I think for my first stab at it, it turned out okay.
Yeah.
It's like everything with this. It's like I'm flying by the seat of my pants. Everything is a new experience with this podcast and the creating of this show. So it's welcome any and all feedback for it because I still feel like I don't know what I'm doing with this.
Well, speaking as a listener first, I enjoy the podcast, and I routinely tell whoever I'm talking to that yours is one of my top 5 as far as like actual play podcasts that I listen to go, because there's the ones that I listen to that are serious, or the ones that I listen to that are funny, and then there's Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters, which is just a joy to listen to.
I'm so happy to hear that. And because one of the things I want to do, because there was so many when I first started getting into it, because I have lists of serious Dungeons and Dragons podcasts I listen to as well, and I've got the funny D&D ones I listen to. I really wanted to try and do something unique and something that didn't quite exist what was out there, because there was just so many of them that are out there, and there's so many good ones too, that it was looking for some particular angle that would make us stand out a little bit more and catch people's attention. So I'm just thrilled to hear you say that.
Yeah, it's definitely, you got to find that niche to stand out. I know that there's a lot of it is like diversity at the table, or like all female, like D&D podcasts like Venture Maidens, or the new one, the Broadswords that is out.
Broadswords, yeah, I just started listening to that one too.
Yeah, I spoke to Victoria, who's the DM for that, and her episode's actually going to be coming out after before yours is, and her thing is not only is she all female, but they're keeping their episodes down to 30 minutes, or trying to, just because it's that like that ideal commuting time of, okay, 30 minutes, I can listen to 30 minutes. And I like that. Like,
right.
That is a wonderful idea.
It's a great sweet spot to get into. Especially what we were talking about before of a backlog or a catalog that once the show gets on for a while, if they're all hour-long episodes, that's even more intimidating to try to ingest and absorb that sort of thing. Half an hour, those are more reasonable chunks. I thought about doing something similar with that, but with the editing, I spend so much time in the editing, getting it down to half an hour. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. So it seems like an hour is a good benchmark for us to shoot for.
Right.
But kudos to them if they can keep it going and pull it off.
Definitely. Well, Curtis, we've gone longer than normal, but that's A-okay for me. But I wanted to thank you for taking your time out of your schedule, especially in the evening, and work and kids and school and homework and family life, and I totally understand, but I want to just thank you for taking the time out to talk to me for, my podcast. I really appreciate it. I was like one of the ones I was really looking forward to was having you come on.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure. Happy to be here. And, same to you with your podcast. I don't catch every episode, but I think that's one of the great things about what you do and the people that you bring on. You cover such a myriad number of topics and fandoms that you're going to be able to find something on your show that you want to listen to. So it's like there's been a couple of gems in there that I picked out and listened to, and so I've been a regular listener, but I haven't worked my way through your catalog as of yet.
Oh, that's okay, and that's one of the things that I even recognize, and it took a while for me to recognize, was not every episode is going to be for every person, but there's going to be an episode for every person regardless. Like, all you have to do is look through the description and find the ones that hit it's what you want to listen to.
Absolutely. I can fully endorse that there is an episode out there for everyone that's in Tales from the Fandom.
Well, again, Curtis, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to listening to the next episode. It's actually already queued up for me tomorrow morning, and I can't wait to see what happens next on Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters.
Great. Thanks, David.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Fandom. Subscribe to us on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/Tales from the Fandom to see photos, links, leave feedback, and check out upcoming guests. If you'd like to be a guest, email David at talesfromthefandom@gmail.com.